that's a really good question to ask if you're that person. How long will that last? Because here's the problem. The real reasons why that person is involved and excited, listen very carefully to this, they have nothing to do with a real commitment to Christ. That's the truth. Okay, whatever is keeping them involved, why ever they are enduring for a while, it's not because they're committed deeply to Christ. And so we have to understand that. Maybe they don't have anything better to do. Maybe they're having fun. Maybe they're just concentrating on what all their friends are doing or what makes them feel good. They've got some reasons. But the reasons don't go deep enough. Okay, does that make sense? Is that tracking with what Jesus has said and the analogy he's given? So they endure for a while. Maybe they endure, for the purposes of our study, for the entirety of their college career. You know, maybe they never miss a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or a hub or whatever the event might be. Maybe they're at all of that. But why? That matters, doesn't it? It's not just, well, that person's never missed a service. That person's at everything. Well, that's great. But that could be the while that Jesus is talking about. Phase 4 is really where things take a turn. Okay? In phase 4, this person is scorched. Okay? Something happens. Now, Jesus doesn't say exactly what this is, but let's give a few options. Maybe there is a challenging Bible study. Have you ever had a challenging Bible study where you thought, well, I don't like that at all. I don't like the way he said that. I don't like that teaching. I feel like that was offensive to me. I don't want to change that part of my life, etc., etc. Maybe it was that. Or maybe it was a teammate who made fun of their faith. Or maybe it was an internal conflict within the group. Maybe there's a problem. Maybe there's some drama. Maybe there's some friction. Maybe there's some kind of trial, or maybe there's a temptation that pops up. Maybe there's a persecution of some kind because of the word, Jesus says, Matthew 13:21. In some way, their faith has been put to the test, and maybe it's for the first time in their young Christian life, and whatever the specifics are, it causes, according to Mark's account, an immediate stumbling. An immediate stumbling. Now that word translated means to cause to be brought to a downfall, to cause to sin. Okay, so we're not talking about, well, this person just made a mistake, or this person fell, but they're going to get right back up. No, whatever this scorching was, whatever this event was, it cut them down. It knocked them down. In other words, they quit. And they quit immediately. And the question might be important to answer. Why did this person get so quickly scorched? Well, again, we know the answer. It's because they never took the time and made the effort to plant their roots in Christ. Now here's why this is so important. This person, whether he or she, they fed not off of Christ, but off of the spiritual energy of other people, or the litany of activity that was being offered, the good vibe. Maybe you've been part of a group. If you've been part of a group at all for very long, you know there are good times and bad times in that group, don't you? There's times when everybody's glad to be there, and you attract more people because everything's going great. And then there's times when that's not the case. You're having some problems, and those are the times when you lose some people. And the question becomes, who's really part of this group and why? But somebody who is immediately scorched and stumbles and falls away, they were never feeding off of Christ. They were feeding off of something else. And what does Jesus say about, if you're not connected to me, if your source of spiritual energy is not me, what are you going to be able to do? How long are you going to be able to survive, according to John 15? Apart from me, you can what? You can do nothing. Jesus says, if you become disconnected from me, it won't matter how many events you go to, it won't matter how many retreats you attend, or how many Bible classes you sit through. I am the only true source. And so if this is playing out in real life, it can happen very quickly. This person could be at at Bible study on Wednesday night, and everything seems fine, and then without warning, without communication, maybe this has happened in your circle. You never even understand why or what happened, and you just don't see them again. You get ghosted. They don't answer your calls. They don't answer your texts. They're done. And sometimes you know why, and sometimes you don't. But that's what happened. And you think, man, how could that person, turn their back on Christ so quickly, so immediately? And what we need to remind ourselves is, okay, I'm dealing with a shallow faith. And they just never dug deep enough. And I need to learn something from that. This is more common than we might think, especially among people who have not been converted to Christ, but have been converted to a group. They've been converted to some kind of experience. They've been converted to an idea instead of being converted to the New Testament church. And that's why a lot of people, when they get out of their youth group or their college group, and they look around, they say, what is this? And they don't recognize it because it's not, as tailored to them. It's not as customized and individualized and special, if you will. And they don't see what they have had for all those years, and they get scorched. And if you have to lay the blame at anybody's feet, who do we have to lay it at? Is that the church's fault? All of those events, all of those activities, this entire ministry, I can tell you this as one of the deacons, Nate can tell you this as the minister, Robert can tell you this as one of the elders. This entire ministry is built to actually connect you to Christ in His church. And great lengths are gone to help that happen, but we cannot make you do that, right? Nobody can make anybody do that. And as we see in the ministry of Jesus, people came and went constantly for various reasons. And most of those people did not stick. They did not stay. They were very shallow in their faith. And so we have to be really careful that we're not connected to the church for reasons other than we love the Lord and we want to serve Him, and we're committed to Him no matter what. Ideally speaking, I could stand up here this morning and say, listen, the Dalraida College ministry is about to dissolve. We've had some issues. We've got some budgetary problems. And from now on, this, as you know it, is not going to exist. Now, you're still welcome to be part of this church. We're going to continue to go on and serve God. But this particular ministry is no longer going to exist. I just wonder, number one, what would I have done at your age? And number two, what would you do? What would happen to your faith if that happened? Those are the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves, don't we? Because that's probably not going to happen. But you need to ask yourself that so that you can test your faith and examine yourself as the Bible tells us to do. So phase 4 is where it all goes wrong. You get scorched and you quit. Phase 5 is called withering. And it's a natural reaction, a natural result of quitting. It's withering. Without a connection to Christ, that scorched Christian does not and cannot last very long. And you've heard this example all your life, like a coal that's removed from a blazing fire. Well, it doesn't take very long for that thing to grow cold, and the same is true for a Christian who removes themselves from the church, from God. The excitement turns to disappointment. The love grows cold. The connections are quickly replaced. This used to be my friend group, and now I'm going to go find another one. The word translated withered away means to make dry or to dry up. Now, if you've ever tried reaching out to somebody who has had this happen, you have probably found that not all the time, but a lot of the time, it just doesn't work. You try to reach out and help this person, but they might not even want to talk to you. And if they do want to talk to you, you might not have much luck in getting them to come back because, again, they have chosen to wither. They have disconnected themselves from Christ if they were ever connected to Him in the first place. And so they're withering. And that withering leads very quickly to this last phase of death. And inevitable and undeniable. It's a separation from God. It's a separation from Christ, from the blessings of Christianity, and they've gone from saved to lost. And there's just no question biblically that that's exactly what has happened. And so, as we look at that, and as you think about this, there's a lot being said by Jesus in this parable, in this particular aspect, in this soil. But can you see how this could be a cycle for some people? This might just happen one time, but it could happen over and over again. Have you ever had a lesson in life that you're supposed to be learning, but you're not learning it? So you just keep going through the cycle of what happens when you don't learn your lesson? Well, that certainly can happen here. Somebody to live their entire life in a cycle that looks like this, thinking that they're a true Christian and never really seeing their condition. And again, the real problem is a lack of spiritual depth. Spiritual depth is the problem. I'm going to read what one writer said because I think it's really helpful. Many are glad to hear a good sermon who do not profit by it. They are told of free salvation, of the believer's privileges and the happiness of heaven, and without any change of heart, without any abiding conviction of their own depravity, their need of a Savior, or the excellence of holiness, they soon profess an unwarranted assurance. But when some heavy trial threatens them, or some sinful advantage may be had, they give up or disguise their profession or turn to some easier system. One secular author put it this way: people care much more for how things look than for how things are. So if this is you, if this describes your faith, and you don't want anybody to know that this describes you, well, just be honest with yourself, okay? Just be honest enough with yourself to realize you need to dig deeper. This doesn't have to stay you, right? You don't have to continue to be this. But let's talk for a minute, and I'd like some feedback here. We're talking about rocks that are keeping certain people from going deeper and developing roots. What are some of the things that might be doing that in someone's life? What would keep you from doing that?
Negative people.
Negative people, okay. Now, can and should negative people keep you from doing that? They don't have to. But that could keep you from digging deeper. What else could?
Sinful relationships you're in.
Okay. I'm in a sinful relationship and I really can't dig any deeper because this person won't let me, or because I'll lose the relationship if I do. That can happen. Relationships are important to us. So that could be part of it. It could be a rock.
I think you made a good point a minute ago. We don't want to be converted to a series of activities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, activities are good. I mean, I think it's fine. Have fun, do things, all that's good. But that's just really to set up situations where we might grow in our relationship with one another, or grow in our faith. They're not the end. They're sort of a currency we use, in some way or the other. That's not the end goal. And if we're converted to a series of activities, well, when the activities don't please us, then we're off somewhere else.
Yeah.
Something else. One of the things people of any age struggle with is what I call being real. And being real means, in this context, means disappointments are going to come and you're going to deal with them. You're not just going to run from them. And that's hard sometimes. That's really challenging sometimes. But you really do your best to sort of deal with them. And it's going to come. I mean, that's going to happen. It doesn't matter where you're at or who you are or what, that's going to happen. And if you want to be real, then you've got to dig deeper. Your relationship, as you said, should be driven by your relationship with Christ. If people are going to disappoint you, it's just
it could be almost anything, couldn't it? Maybe you won't forgive somebody. And maybe that's keeping you from developing deeper roots. Maybe you're just lazy. There's a lot of laziness going around. And if you're talking about a farmer who's got rocks in his field, do you think it's going to be easy to remove them? No. So if you're a lazy farmer, this is what you're going to get from your crop. So laziness could be your rock. You're just not willing to dig deeper. Maybe it's your past. Maybe the failures of your past or the successes of your past. Or maybe you're looking around and you're like, well, I look like everybody else around me. What need is there for me to do anything more than what anybody else is doing? And so it could be a lot of things that are keeping you from going deeper. But I just want you to know that no matter what things look like on the outside and no matter how strong you might feel spiritually right now, the real question is why? And the real question is, have you dug deep enough so that when, not if, when you're tested, when the scorching comes, that you can weather that storm? That's the only real question. With the context of this parable, what does it mean to have roots? What does that look like?
Depth within your faith.
Okay, how do you get that?
Continuous study.
Okay, everyone in here knows these answers. But the ability to sit in a class and say, well, it's Bible study. That's pretty easy to say that. That's the right answer. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, so I won't do that. But if I'm to really ask you how many of you are really engaged in serious personal study of God's Word on a regular basis, well, that's a different number than the people who know that that's the answer, probably, right? Everyone knows that's important, but we've heard it so many times that we're like, well, I'm in class. You're teaching me the Bible right now. I go to Bible class at school that somebody's teaching me the Bible there. I come to a Sunday night devotional. I'm fixing to listen to a sermon. I'm probably going to hear something again tonight. It's covered, right? No, that's somebody else's Bible study. You guys, and this is not meant to be offensive, but none of you prepared for this class. Did you? Did anybody study for this class this morning besides me? No. So you don't get credit for that, so to speak. That doesn't really build your faith in the same way that it'll build mine when I study for myself. And so there's no replacement for that. There's no substitute for that. Is it good to listen and be taught? Sure, that's a big part of your faith. Yes, you need to be taught by other people, but it's not the same as studying diligently for yourself. The other component to that would obviously be prayer. In your relationship with God, you listen to Him through His Word, you talk to Him through prayer. And again, these are very simple concepts. This commitment to Christ and His Word and this devotion to prayer, those are your roots. It's not complicated, it's not complex. I think that's why Satan is so effective at convincing us, well, you don't really need to do that. There's prayer happening all around you all the time. There's Bible study happening all around you every day. That counts. And the problem is it's not the same, and it doesn't really count in the same way. So which group of people best fits this description in the context of the parable? Are these bad people? Are these rebels and atheists and skeptics and unbelievers? Well, who are we talking about?
I heard a preacher describe the people in the parable as like the church camp Christians. Like where they go to church camp every year, they have the spiritual high to say, and then once they get back to the real world, they fall off until church camp next summer.
That's a good way of putting it. The Christmas and Easter crowd. I don't know how many college students, probably nobody in this room, but how many college students, take the summers off of their faith? Because the college group's not meeting. How many do that? But again, we're talking about religious people, aren't we? We're not talking about unreligious people. And I think this could explain why so many churches maybe don't challenge their members to go deeper in their faith. And it may be why so many church members just won't tolerate that kind of challenge. Because a lot of people seem to seemingly like collectively decide we're going to be shallow here. This is a shallow place. They don't challenge us to go any deeper. We're not going to let you do that. And that's why so many people who would call themselves Christians, when things get difficult or when you have to be sacrificial or committed, they're just not anywhere to be found. And this is also why so many who would claim to be Christians and who go to church, they have no idea what the Bible actually says on any given subject. They don't know. They'll say, well, let me call somebody. But they haven't studied it. And I heard a lesson on that, but they don't know because they haven't dug those roots for themselves. And so, like that physical soil in Palestine, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of rocky ground in modern day religion. There are a lot of people, young and old, I'm not picking on college students, who really don't have any real connection to their root, being Christ.
Jeremy,
Yeah.
do you think that people like maybe Ananias and Sapphira would fit this description as people who, I mean, I would think, I don't know what their lives were before, but it was pretty apparent that even though they were in the church, they were, they had, accepted it and they were part of the church, but, I mean, they thought they could like trick the Holy Spirit, and they thought that they could give, and so I don't know, maybe greed would be their rock, but they obviously had not bought into what the church was all about because they weren't really willing to serve others more like they wanted to serve themselves. Just trying to think of people in the Bible with that.
I would say you're not wrong about that. And there's probably some of that going on. And there's probably also some overlap between some of these soils. Because I think what Ananias and Sapphira most probably qualify as is the next type of soil. The deceitfulness of riches. That's the thorny soil that we're about to talk about, and that's kind of like seems to be what's going on in their mind. We want to give this money. We want to look like we're good, but we're going to keep some of it for ourselves because we're kind of greedy. That may be a thorny type soil, and so that's a good segue to head into this next kind of soil. And this will be in your handout. It's over here, your torn lesson. As we kind of continue to talk about these different soils that Jesus is mentioning, we're kind of doing this in the same way every time. We're going to talk first of all about the type of soil that Jesus was referring to. The thorny soil. This is what the Bible says about it, okay? Matthew 13:7, some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. Mark's account says some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no crop. And then Luke says some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. And so the word translated thorns means thorn plant. Okay, so it's not just the thorn on the plant. It's the whole plant. And so that's a lot more serious than we might think. We're not just talking about the sting of a single thorn or even a single branch of thorns. We're talking about a plant that produces that. Listen to what somebody has written about this thorny soil. This seed took root in the same part of the field where thorns had been sown by nature. Thorn plants were then, as well as now, extremely vigorous in their growth. One could go to a great deal of trouble to clear a piece of land, but if he neglected his ground, the thorns would take over. Clearing a field required uprooting thorns, not just cutting them. If they were mowed down, they would quickly grow back. In this case, the good plants grew together with the thorns, and eventually the thorns choked them out. Deprived of adequate nourishment, sunlight, and air, the good plants died. And the problem here is not a hard soil. where the seed can't get through. It's not a shallow soil. There's softness enough, there's depth enough available. Wake up, Toby. It's time to wake up. You did it, Toby. You got it. You got it. So the problem is not a hardness. It's not a shallow soil. It's the existence of something else in it that is drawing all the resources and starving the plant of what it actually needs to survive and thrive. That's the real problem. There's something else here growing right along with this plant that's sucking the life out of it, choking the life out of it. And so, what comparisons and contrasts might we make between just this soil and the first two that we talked about? What do you think? Just forget the people. Let's talk about them in a few minutes. But just the soil. What's the differences here?
Well, the seed is being going in the ground, so being planted.
Okay.
First one, but like
Okay. There's being planted in 2 of the 3, right? Is the thorny soil taking root? Is it digging deep enough? Maybe. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be the problem. The seed planted in the thorny soil, it may have taken root, but what happens to it ultimately? It still dies. Just like the other 2. So, maybe we've got our roots, but something else is killing us. The rocky and thorny soils, they're different from the wayside. In what sense? Think about it as you're looking over your fields and tell me the main difference between the wayside soil and these other 2.
There's actually potential for a little growth.
Okay? You're thinking more profoundly than I am, Lofton. The immediate difference, the obvious difference between the wayside and the other 2 is what?
One's in the ground and one's not in the ground. Like
Okay,
one's
you're
sitting
still
on
deeper
top.
than I am.
I
Don't-
would probably see plants on one
Exactly.
side, and I would see nothing at the wayside.
They're visibly, like, wayside you can tell there ain't nothing going to grow there. On the other 2, something may indeed be growing. So, unless you dig down, you can't what? You can't see what's going on under there. And this is why it's so difficult for us sometimes to help other people, because we really don't know what's going on in their life unless they tell us. Like, I can't look around this room and tell who's the rocky soil, who's the thorny soil. I could tell who the wayside soil is because they're probably not here. They don't care. The word is not even getting through. But you cannot visibly observe how compromised these other 2 soils are. You just can't tell. There might be something growing up, and it might be 2 days away from dying or 2 minutes away from dying. You just don't know. The thorns and the seed require the same resources, and the resources are limited. Okay? There's only so much sunlight and water that this thing is going to get. And it cannot be shared. It cannot be divided. Okay? Or this seed, this plant just doesn't have a chance to grow and produce fruit. So that's the soil. Okay? Let's start making some observations about who we're talking about here. And again, let's let Jesus tell us before we talk about it. He who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. Okay? Now let's go to Mark's account. These are the ones sown among thorns. They are the ones who hear the word, and the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things enter in, choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. Luke says the ones that fell among thorns are those who, when they have heard, go out and are choked with cares, riches, and pleasures of life, and bring no fruit to maturity. So, what sets this group of people apart from the first two groups? Are they closer to being fruitful? They're a lot closer to being fruitful than the other two are. Theoretically, these people are being spiritually choked in both observable ways and unobservable ways. Okay? You can probably tell in someone's life when there are thorns. At some point, you can probably tell, can't you? You can tell when somebody's enamored with and eaten up with and becoming obsessed with something other than Christ. You can tell when that's choking the spiritual life out of them and it's stealing their time and their resources and their energy and their money and their life. You can see it, can't you? You ever seen that? You ever experienced that in your own life? I have. This is not something that you have to really guess about. And so you can observe this more so than you can the other two soils. Because eventually this comes above ground, doesn't it? And you're like, hey, there's some thorns choking out that plant. I see it. And so that gives you a greater opportunity to recover from that because other people can see it. And so this creates an opportunity that you may or may not want anybody to notice, but it's certainly observable. And what's stopping these people from bringing fruit to maturity is what we want to talk about for the next few minutes. It's these thorns. Now, this is not a vague thing in your life. If you are the thorny soil, this is not just these vague things that Jesus mentions. There are very specific thorns in the life of someone who this is happening to. Okay, so let's kind of examine the thorns here. There's several different categories of what kind of things this might be. But the possibilities specifically are just endless. Now, the word translated cares means anxiety or worry. And so, since these anxieties and worries are of this world, we're talking about the anxiety and the worry that comes from earthly things, okay? Now, if you don't have these, you need to explain how you've managed that. Because we've all got these, okay? We've all got jobs, finance concerns. We've all got some kind of probably opinion on politics and the government and national concerns, school, grades, scholarship concerns, health, appearance, family, relationships. None of those things are bad, but all those things are earthly. And all of those things they almost self-generate anxiety, don't they? And it's just a question of will you allow all of that to choke you out? It's not a question of whether or not you're going to have it. Because we're all going to have the cares of this world. And the question is, will they choke the spiritual life out of us and keep us from bearing fruit? Because the anxieties and cares of this world are not simply thorns to be avoided. They are commanded against. This is not just something, I better watch out for that. I better be careful and not let that come into my life. No, the Bible says we are to eliminate. Not the sources of these things, because you can't do that. But you have to cut off those anxieties and those worries before they take over. And where do you do that? Where does that battle happen? Doesn't it happen in here? It happens in your mind. When you look at a passage of like Matthew 6, 25 through 34, do not be anxious. Well, you've got to accomplish that inside your heart and your mind. When you look at Philippians chapter 4 and Paul tells you what to think about. I want you to think about these things. Well, that's a choice you've got to make. I've got to decide what I'm going to dwell on. Yes, I've got worldly cares and anxieties that I could focus on, but I don't have to, and I don't have to let that drain my resources. I can focus on something else and feed my spirit and my soul. 1 Peter 5:7, casting all of your anxieties upon Him, for He cares for you. At the very least, we take our anxieties and we give them to God. We cast them upon Him instead of wallowing in them, which we're all prone to do. I am. But that will choke you. And you've experienced this, haven't you? You've been depleted of energy because you spent all day worrying about something, or all week, or all month, or all semester. And you probably didn't change anything except the condition of your soul and spirit. You choked yourself out. So it can do that. Those things can be thorns. The second category is the deceitfulness of riches. Why do you think riches are described as deceitful?
False happiness.
Okay, they promise something, and they do. Every advertisement, every commercial, every vehicle you see driving down the street that you want. What does it promise you? Silently, but very clearly, it promises if you have this, it'll make you happy. It'll bring joy and fulfillment to your life. Very deceitful. Paul said in 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. It's a trap. And like any good trap, you don't recognize it. It doesn't look dangerous. It looks good. It looks appealing. A root, by its nature, is below the surface, and it may produce something unexpected once it grows above the ground. And see, the roots of thorns probably don't look a lot different than the seed of the Word of God. Physically speaking, in this soil, they probably don't look very different. But once they start growing and producing, they do look very different. And they vividly illustrate here this deceitfulness that Jesus is referring to. Satan is not selling you a thorn plant, but that's what you're buying. He's selling you something attractive that he says will grow into exactly what you want it to grow into, but he's lying to you. And what is going to happen is it's going to grow into something unruly and something that's going to rob you of your resources spiritually. The love of money is powerful temptation. The ESV says it is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith. That word craving means to stretch oneself out in order to touch or grasp something, to reach after or desire something. You may have had a craving before. Have you ever had a craving? Brooke used to get cravings when she was pregnant all 4 times. Publix is usually where I have to go, the bakery department, to satisfy Brooke's cravings, and I have to say I developed a few of my own while I was helping her fulfill her cravings. Cravings are nasty things because when do they usually go away? I mean, honestly, at what point if you've really ever had a craving, at what point does it go away?
Not until you satisfy.
Not until you get what you wanted. And so we buy into it. It's like a fish on a hook. We buy into it. Like, if I don't get this, I'm going to die. And if I don't have this in my life, I'm just not going to be happy. I'm not going to think of anything else until I get it. When Brooke got one of these cravings, it was useless for me to say, "Oh, that'll go away. You won't want that for very much longer." Well, I could get punched for saying that. I'm not going to be able to go on with my life until I help her fulfill that craving. That's kind of what it came down to. And so sometimes this is how it is in your life. You get these cravings for stuff, and it's not satisfied until you get what you think you have to have. And it's deceitful. Because not only does it not give you what it promised, but that entire time you were chasing it, what did you do for God? How much did you grow in your faith? 0. You were dying. Your resources were being depleted. Your joy was being funneled into something else that, as it turns out, doesn't provide any. And so this is all just a snare and a trap. And if you crave something that won't satisfy you, you're really in trouble. And you're really going to be choked in a way that is really going to kill you, probably differently than these other first two that we've talked about. So we'll kind of stop there and pick up next week with more discussion on what these thorns are. But this is happening to you, but at the same time, you and I have to take responsibility because we're letting it happen. You know, we're allowing it. We're embracing it. We're letting these things grow into our lives. We're giving them power. We're feeding them. And that's why it's happening. So consider these things, and we'll see you later today and certainly next week. Thank you so much.